or community members, excuse me.
No attendees yet.
And have we heard from Rick?
We have not.
Okay,
And the minutes, we don't have the minutes, but we have the video, so it's fine.
okay.
Right.
All right. Hi, Brittany. Can you hear us? Thank you for joining us. All right, let's get started with the December Civilian Review Board meeting. I'm going to start out with a land acknowledgement statement, and then we'll begin with some. We'll review the agenda and the minutes from our November meeting. We have a training topic today on handcuffing and flexible restraint devices, and then we'll do a case review with allegations of excessive force. Are we recording?
We are.
Okay, great. All right, since time immemorial, the Kalapuya people have been the indigenous stewards to our region, building dynamic communities, maintaining balance with wildlife, and enacting sustainable land practices. This land acknowledgement is a way of resisting the erasure of indigenous histories and to honor Native communities by inviting truth and reconciliation. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. As we consider the impacts of colonization, we also acknowledge the strength and resiliency of displaced indigenous people. The city of Eugene is built within the traditional homelands known as Kalapuya Ilihi. Kalapuya descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon. They continue to make contributions in our communities here and across the lands. We express our respect for their inherent political sovereignty of all federally recognized tribal nations and indigenous people who live in the state of Oregon and across the nation. Did everybody get a chance to look over the minutes from the November meeting? All right. Does anybody have any changes or amendments to make to those minutes?
I move to approve the minutes.
Can I get a second?
I will second that.
All in favor? It's unanimous. All right. Traditionally, we open our meeting with comments from board members and reports from commission liaisons. Do we have any reports from our commission liaisons? Would you like to start us off, Clay?
I can, yes. Happy to be back in person. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you in person. The police commission did not meet in November. It was canceled for a reason that I forget now. Do you remember what?
Mayor celebration or?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, there was a conflict. So we are meeting on Thursday and I will bring a report after that.
Do you have any personal comments?
Oh, I do not, except for what I said. Well, nice.
Thank you, Clay. Brittany, do you have any opening comments for this meeting today?
Yeah, can you hear me okay? Cool. Yeah, I'll speak to this a little bit later, but just wanted to comment on kind of the intersection of the nature of this case and my professional job, in recognition that the 24/7 crisis center that I'm working to bring to the community, I think would have been an incredibly valuable asset to this situation in a preventative way. So I just have to call that out. I think it will be valuable in many ways, but there's so much about this case that so glaringly could have been avoided if we had a better resource on some of the earlier encounters. So just wanted to give nod to that to kick us off tonight.
Thank you. Carolyn?
Welcome. It's nice to meet you. As some of you know, I've been on the board for going on 8 years, and I have decided that I'm going to step down from the board. I will finish out this year and get us to the point where they're looking for new board people. So February-ish, I think.
They can start January.
January, yeah. So I'll probably be at the next meeting also, but I'm stepping down. So that's my comment. That's it.
Thank you for your service.
Yep.
I'd like to say welcome to Noah. We are really glad to have you on this board. And glad that you passed the background and everything so quickly to be here. Thank you for joining us tonight. That's my opening comment.
I am sad to hear that Carolyn is leaving. I did not know that for now. We're losing a lot of institutional experience and knowledge with Leah and Bernadette and Carolyn, but we always support you in doing what's best for yourself. And I'll miss working with you, but perhaps we can connect in other capacities.
Yeah, you know where to find me.
Last meeting I talked about my discussion with the deputy chief about the Pride event. And at that time, it seems like perhaps there was going to be something different happening for next summer in terms of the police department's involvement in Pride. But it actually seems like after their meeting early November, that things might work out, that the police department might be involved in protecting Pride next summer. So I think that's good. That's a big update from the last time that I spoke about that. And welcome. That's all I got.
Well, thank you everyone for welcoming me so warmly. I was a bit afraid. I had a very big exam earlier. That's all. Sit back and observe and learn as we go. Thank you.
All right, we are ahead of schedule, which is good. We now have time for a training topic on handcuff and flexible restraint devices. So
Your guy.
we can,
Who's supposed to do that?
We have Tyler Richards is supposed to be there.
Oh, yeah.
we can table this and do case review first. If you think that that's a good idea, Rob.
Yeah.
In that case, we usually start case review with a presentation from Rob, who will give us an overview of the case.
Can I make a suggestion? Do you think that it would be relevant to our discussion to have this training topic prior to discussing that?
I think that was,
That was the point, right?
that was
Yeah,
the point,
yeah.
that was the design.
Yeah, so I wonder, like, could we do the auditor's report first
Ooh.
instead of the case review? If we're,
That's a
I
good
don't-
suggestion.
or something else?
I like
Yeah.
that.
Are you
Sorry, yeah, just a brief, yeah.
I could, let me just step out really quick and check calling him and see where he's at. He might be really close.
Let's try that.
I mean, we already
Yeah,
had a schedule, so.
yeah, let's
Yeah.
He's not meant to be here again.
Yeah,
actually. Oh,
Oh, that's.
yeah, that's right.
So I've, found most of this book. And next, and, I was just looking at our numbers, we have, we just hit over 300 complaints sometime this week. But, and 202 show forces, which is when they draw their weapons. It doesn't necessarily mean point. 165 uses of force, and again, I don't have a basis yet to compare. And there's 16 allegations, cases of allegations, and it looks like virtually all of them, if not all of them, generated from internal complaints, either from EPD or I know I've opened 2 now after I've reviewed a couple cases. So it's certainly a paradigm shift. How's he doing?
He got caught in a crash on Beltline.
Oh,
On
no.
his way, but he's moving very, very slowly.
He's working on it.
Yeah, huh?
He's working on it or?
No, he's driving in and there was a crash on Beltline,
Okay.
so he got stuck in it.
Not part of him.
Not part of him being involved, no, yes.
Good.
And
The traffic related to it.
I guess for your knowledge, no, I was auditor from 2009 to 2021, retired. Leah left in September, so I'm taking her spot on an interim basis. I don't know what that time frame is. And I used to do this work in Cincinnati for a long time for Justice Department and consultant and things, so came in pretty smoothly, at least for me, maybe not for my staff, but for me. It's interesting having been here in the community for 3 years. I know when I started in 2009, my opinion is there were more people who were afraid of the police coming to things. And I think in today's world, I think there's more people, I'm not saying where they way down or anything, but there are more people than in 2009 who now fear that the police won't come. And they have a very significant problem on response times and things like that. The resources don't match the need in the community. And so they're trying to figure out ways to do that. But that is probably the median of our complaints is the lack of response or response time, or follow-up and things like that, or how dispatchers dispatch calls. And so we have an awful lot of calls in regard to that. I think that, my opinion again, comparing to 2009 and 21, and I thought it trended, is they seem more interested, most of them, in problem solving rather than arresting people. In 2009, it seemed like arresting was real important, and I think now it's problem solving. I'm even with all of my experience, I'm just stunned at the number of contacts that they have. We watch the films and stuff of people who are on fentanyl. It's just extraordinary to me. And at some point in time, we need more people to understand that it's not a lifestyle choice, that it's a life or death choice. And how do we migrate to that level of treatment versus just, oh, Saturday night, I think I'll just do some fentanyl. But it's really tragic in our community, and seeing that. I think that the community, the city is better than it was in 2021, during the time 2009 to 2021. But again, it's just paraphrasing what Coach Lanning of the football team said, is like Eugene's like a keystone species or a keystone city. There aren't many like it. New York City is a keystone city. San Francisco is a keystone city. Eugene is a keystone city. And they're so much different than almost every other city in the country. And I've been in every state but one. And so how we respond to things and how people are and what a benevolent community it is, well, it's also faced with a lot of issues that clearly need more resources. So that's just, the opinions that I have after about 3 years. I've been around a little bit, and it's a very unique place. Honestly, I feel safer here than I did 3 years ago. I feel safer here, really, in Florida. We have cartels and drive-by shootings and maniacal drivers. And other folks who are disruptive, but that's a different discussion. But been interesting to be back. Great staff to work with. And it's been great. She's new after we lost Vicky. And it is good to be back, but I think a lot of things are trending in the right direction. It's great to have all your volunteer work that you do. It means a lot to all of us, even as a community, the volunteer boards that we have in the city. So thank you very much.
So I think Tyler's gonna be a little bit, so it's kind of up to you guys on how you want to proceed. I think it could be useful, but at the same time, I don't know how important it is. If you guys have questions after reading through all of that, you think would be beneficial to get that, you think you need to wait, then that's up to you guys. If you want to.
Yeah, I know it's kind of unfair to ask. So you think like 15 minutes?
It's so hard to say on
Yeah.
a crash on Beltline because sometimes you
Yeah.
get the one crash and then you get the second one, and then you get the third one and.
It's a crapshoot.
Trying
Yeah,
to get
it
it.
really
Yeah.
is. So, and when I talked to him, he was still on Beltline, so that's still a bit away with traffic the way it is. So I don't know.
I think on a micro level, it's probably helpful, but really on a macro level, even if he comes after the case,
We can talk more.
yeah, it's still for future, visions.
Yeah.
How's that sound to you? Yeah,
That's fine, yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Unless, do you just want to do the training? You want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks. Tyler's all prepared.
okay, well, we will table that until after the case review.
But I will say this, if you guys have questions about it while you're going through it, feel free to throw in my direction and I'll do my best to answer.
Yeah. And kind of the way that works, Noah, is that, we can invite people, we can then invite officers, to the table, for discussion and to ask questions, at any time as well. So thank you for being available.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Rob.
Brittany, I'm not gonna do the slideshow, so if it doesn't work, like, raise your hand and then I'll try it, because the OWL and Zoom and PowerPoint don't always get along.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got our case summary. So we've got allegations regarding use of force and professionalism. So our summary of facts. So on July 15th, 2023, Sergeant C responded to a request for service for disorderly subject in Eugene, Oregon at the residence of the suspect. CAD information was available to the officers before their contact and it revealed the suspect was mentally diminished, had been combative with officers, had failed to follow lawful commands, previously carried a pocket knife, and had a history of resisting arrest. Officer A, Officer B, Officer D, Officer E, and Officer F also responded to the service request. The officers formulated a plan to contact the suspect. Officer F went to the suspect's open front door of his or her residence. Officer F requested the suspect come outside. He or she refused and threatened physical harm to him or her, which is Officer F. Officer D was also threatened by the suspect.
If I can stop this, if you have any questions, we have acronyms, we have jargon. This is not like the medical business, but nevertheless, if you have any questions about any of that as he goes on, just ask at that point in time if it'll help you with the matter.
So approximately 26 minutes after officers arrived, the suspect exited his or her apartment, ran from the officers, was caught by the officers, and taken to the ground. The suspect actively resisted arrest when confronted by the officers. The suspect raised his or her legs, kicked Sergeant C, and grabbed his or her handheld Eugene PD radio. Sergeant C was on top of the suspect and delivered approximately 9 focused blows to his or her head, upper body, and 2 knee strikes to his or her upper body. Officer A, Officer B, and Officer D assisted with gaining control and handcuffing the suspect while Sergeant C deployed the focused blows and knee strikes. In Sergeant C's internal affairs interview, he or she stated his actions were justified and explained his or her thoughts during the incident. Sergeant C denied he violated policy. So we had 3 allegations. So it was 800.2 use of force, that Sergeant C used force in excess of that which was reasonably necessary under the circumstances when he or she repeatedly struck the suspect in the face with a closed fist. The second one is 800.2 use of force, that Sergeant C used force in excess of that which was reasonably necessary under the circumstances when he or she delivered knee strikes to the suspect's face. And then the third one, professionalism, 103.4.2 professionalism, that Sergeant C failed to use carefully reasoned discretion or ensure that his or her conduct was neutral during the arrest of the suspect. So for the adjudication recommendations, pretty straightforward. So auditor's office recommended sustained on all 3 allegations. Chain of command was unanimous, all within policy, and the chief also on all three were within policy. And then issues for y'all's discussion. So it was internally generated complaint, classifications, use of force professionalism, and then there are the policies. And then there are the summary of the adjudication recommendations.
Now, just for their clarification, when you say internally generated complaints, does that mean that someone at EPD filed a complaint?
This was generated by us. And then the materials that we provided for y'all's review, I won't read them, but it's all the standard stuff that was involved in the investigation. And then this is where we end. I stop sharing my screen and let y'all take it around. And if anybody needs it to see a allegation or anything while we're talking, I'll bring it back up for you to look at.
You want to bring back up the slide 7 on there, the issues? So they can.
Thank you so much, Rob. The way we format our discussions is we usually do this in 3 rounds. Otherwise it could be, you know, free for all, brouhaha, never gets to that. But as a way of, you know, kind of staying organized, we break our discussions down into 3 rounds. And the first is we discuss the complaint procedure, intake, classification, and monitoring. So we're discussing, you know, the auditor's classification. We're discussing whether we agree with, you know, kind of how the case was classified and what kind of allegations were brought forward. Yeah, other kind of discussions and considerations based upon the investigation. Carolyn, can I ask you to start us off on the first round today, please?
Sure. Before I start,
I may have misspoken. I'm sorry. I think Cindy corrected me. It was a Eugene PD generated complaint.
I think it was an auditor generated.
Oh, that's what I
complaint.
said.
Oh. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought he said it was internal. Sorry.
He did say it was internal. but-
Well, internal from, right.
It wasn't
outside
like a
EPD, it was from the
community
audit.
member.
Right,
outside. Okay.
inside the city.
There was not an external citizen complaint.
No,
Yes,
no,
yes.
it was generated from use of force review from Lindsay.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
Sorry for
I think you had some onboarding, but just to clarify, we do try to keep everything very anonymous. So we'll say officer A, B, and C. There's a lot of officers here, so I don't know who was who. I couldn't keep that straight, but
Yeah.
was A the one who was
C.
out?
Sergeant C.
Sergeant C
Yeah,
is who.
the only
the
sergeant,
allegation-
so that's all.
Okay, and we do say sergeant? Yeah, okay. So for the complaint intake classification and monitoring, I agree with the classifications. I think that they were appropriate. I, as always, appreciate how thoroughly Sergeant Nelson does his job. It's nice to see that again. One real standout moment for me in, I think, I don't remember which interview you said, and I quote, well, roughly quote, I paraphrase, how long have you been in with EPD? CRB wants to know. I like that. I liked how you asked that specifically, knowing that we would ask. It's like you knew that this would come up to us, but it's that sort of detail that's good. It feels strange that it took this long to get all the way through. That would be kind of my only comment on the monitoring of it, but it just took a while. That's it.
All right, thank you. I also appreciate the IA investigation. Great to see you again. Great to see you writing again. I also appreciate the work that the auditor's office, Rob and Lindsay, did in generating these complaints. I don't have any other comment. I'm going to save the bulk of my comments for round 2. Monique?
I agree that it seemed like the monitoring took place, or it was a bit longer than is typical. I also thought that the investigation was sufficient, and agree with the classifications.
May I ask some clarifying questions first? Sustained within policy mean what exactly here?
It's a really good question. We don't have that paper in the packet this time that kind of explains.
Sustained means that the police violated some policy, the policy that are listed there. Within policy means that the deciders determined that they acted within the policy for a reasonable police officer. Based on a reasonable police officer standard.
Can you share the like,
So the event happened, but it was within policy, and then there's also unfounded, which means it didn't even happen. And then there's also insufficient evidence. So in these types of investigations, so this is an administrative investigation. We have lawyers in the room that explain it way better than me. But the level of the standard is preponderance of the evidence. So is it 50.1% that Tom Brady deflated footballs against the Colts versus versus beyond a reasonable doubt for a criminal case. So the standard for these things are preponderance of the evidence. They are evaluated differently though, depending on the seriousness of the allegation. So if there's some things that would be devastating to a police officer's career, integrity-based allegations. So those are scrutinized stronger than 50.1. I mean, there's policies and there's practices, and that's just the practice of kind of how it works. So if there's an allegation of insubordination, I mean, that's right up there. And honesty, I mean, that's very close to treason, really. So those things are just scrutinized much harder than did you curse at somebody because you were having a bad day. And so we've got sustained, it happened, violated policy, insufficient evidence, unfounded, didn't happen. It was within policy, the event happened, but there's nothing wrong with what happened.
That is nice. I assume, but I didn't want to assume.
And normally we have that with packets as far as that.
In the only, maybe for the professionalism, I don't remember, it talked about neutrality. How is that determined or defined? Like, what is the standard? What is neutral?
Good question.
I mean,
I can comment.
I can give you the policy and send it to you after the meeting. So go down a rabbit hole here, which kind of what Jose was talking about, things that we try to not discourage in the meeting.
And oftentimes the decisions are qualified, not quantified. You know, I mean, you have to, at the end of the day, you have to have an opinion based on all the facts that you have before you. And the primary standard is Graham versus Connor on reasonable officer use of force, like the primary standard. And then you tie that in on use of force to the policies that they have. And yeah, the professionalism thing is, and you'll see professionalism sometimes, you'll see judgment sometimes, are far grayer areas. Because one person's view of professionalism is different than another person's view of professionalism. So again, you just kind of have to, you at the end of the day, you have a subjective opinion based on the facts that you know.
And allegations are drafted straight out of what the policies say. So in the policy manual for EPD, but then they're personalized a little bit for the event, but it's all based on what the policy says. And sometimes we split hairs on what those words are and how they mean.
And the key word is civilian oversight here. So we're not necessarily always upholding our considerations to say strict legal definitions. But we are asking for like, kind of evidence-based reasoning and assessment that is, as Mark said, somewhat subjective based upon a civilian perspective. Does that jive with what you would say, Clay?
Sure. Yeah.
But it's an eclectic group
Yeah.
too. I mean, there've been 3 lawyers in here before and one soon to be a lawyer and.
Couple soon to be lawyers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, so So you have a very different perspective from the group, so it kind of fits with the civilian background.
I think council's goal, is to have a cross-section of the community speaking on behalf of the community, on these sorts of things. And sometimes, like with allegations, we recognize the stress it has on employees. If you've ever been accused of something, it's stressful, but there also then has to be appreciation that as individual officers have more power than any other individual in this nation in terms of being able to take away your life, liberty, on a dark and stormy night. As I always say, they can ruin your life, and they're likely to believe in court. So that degree of power comes a tremendous amount of responsibility and at times scrutiny. And that's just the nature of the job, that even the military can't do the things that our police can do in this country for now. That I remind them of that often, is the tremendous responsibilities that they have and the power that they have, how that impacts the community.
Well, thank you for answers. Other than that, I will concur with the time length being questionable. And the dates I remember, I don't think there's anything else that really stood out. Thank you. Last thing.
Thanks, no.
Yeah, I think it'll be helpful actually to come back to some of those questions, I think, in a later section too, like, because we often ask for people's opinions in the room about like what some of the words mean, like neutrality, especially in an investigation when questions were asked, I think, to sort of lead a conversation related to that question. So I find that question pretty helpful, maybe later down the road too. I wanted to clarify, so the intake was like okay, gonna try and test my jargon. There was a use of force, so a blue team report, and then does that mean that you guys review all of those and you saw this one and it raised red flags? Yeah, and then you said, please investigate for these three.
Right, then we brought it to the attention of Leah, so.
Yeah.
Discussed it in a meeting that we had.
Right.
EPD, that led us to today.
Okay, cool. So my only question about that is, and I'm just forgetting, I know that someone has told me this before, and all of us, I'm sure. Those reports, like if they're reviewed by IA and flags are also raised, would someone be raising the questions from within IA or from within the police department, possibly for an investigation also? Like that could have also happened,
Yeah,
or
through the blue
Yeah.
team review by
Yeah.
the chain of command. Anyone along the chain could say, I think this needs to be further investigated. by
Okay.
IA."
and that didn't happen in this case.
Right, that's my recollection.
Yeah.
And so that would be an internal complaint.
Right.
So yeah, anywhere in the chain of command review that can happen, but it is against the auditor's office.
Yeah, okay, cool. Thanks. So that I think is appropriate. There's checks and balances, multiple folks looking at these kinds of incidents, especially uses of force, so that's helpful. And I thought the process after that seemed to go really fluidly. A good investigation, thank you. And I thought the classifications were appropriate.
Thank you, Clay.
Sure.
Brittany?
Yeah, I just wanted to say hi to Noah because I didn't know he was in the room. So welcome. And also thank you for asking questions. This is my third, maybe fourth meeting. So I learned so much from what you just asked. So thank you. I didn't have any comments initially until learning that this was generated by the auditor's office. And I don't know that I have been present for a conversation around a case that has been generated that way yet, or I haven't noticed if I had. So that was interesting. And it had also caught my attention for when we discuss the adjudication recommendations, but just that the auditor and EPD completely disagreed. And then it's just interesting to me. And then it maybe connects a few more dots that this was auditor generated or not. Just kind of unique details that are different than ones that I've been present to discuss before.
All right, we're on round two.
Let's do it.
All right, that means I'm starting it off. I had some questions.
And can you
Sorry.
state what the round is?
Yes.
For everybody, yeah.
Thank you, Lai. We are discussing EPD policy, practices, and training considerations for this round. So, okay, on page 17 of 19 in the interview with Sergeant C. I'm just going to read from a paragraph that reads, Sergeant C said, quote, just because we have multiple cops in on it of itself does not necessarily mean that we don't use that negates the force that we use. The force that's necessary and reasonable is the force that's necessary and reasonable. And in this paragraph, Sergeant C was asked about, I believe if I've got the context correct, the fact that there were other officers there and being asked to explain the multiple punches and knee strikes to the head. Can I ask what kind of training EPD, is there like a threshold when it comes to like the amount of officers in a situation and the kind of like use of force escalation? Or is it just kind of like emergent kind of conditions?
Or do you want to hit that or you want me to?
Yeah, I can take a jab at it. Sometimes what I've found is less can be more in certain circumstances. A lot of times when you get too many officers involved in some things, it becomes uncontrolled. We do have numerous things that we train with regards to taking people down in a safe manner, removing hands from underneath them in a safe manner. And we always endeavor to sort of like mitigate these strikes, particularly to the head, because it may be lawful, right? But it certainly doesn't look good, right? And we want to make sure that that what we're doing is looks professional, right? We don't want to be punching people if we don't have to. There are circumstances when that's really the only option. So we do have, I don't know the specifics of this case, so I can't speak to it. But in a case where we see like more closed fist strikes and things of that nature, are cases where like maybe we get the person to the ground, they're still resisting, they're hiding their hands. There's a concern that maybe they're reaching for weapons, and we're trying to safely get their hands out so that a higher level of force doesn't have to be used against them. So we do have like what's called a hidden hands technique for removing those, removing their hands if they're underneath their body. But a lot of times, officers are in a high stress situation, and that training is not embedded in the forefront of their mind. So they don't always think to go to that, right? It's you resort back to your natural like amygdala hijack where
Sure,
where
totally.
the monkey brain is kicking
Yes.
in, and you hit somebody and all of a sudden like, yes, it's justified, but it certainly doesn't look as good as we would like it to.
I can add a little.
Oh,
bit
go
to
ahead,
that,
please,
like,
please.
Because I forgot you're not familiar with the case, I kind of put you on the spot.
Did he, for our recorders, say who he is?
Yeah.
And what you're doing now?
Yeah, my name is Tyler Richards. I'm a sergeant, and I'm the defensive tactics sergeant.
Thank you.
So, there was another quote in there too, that where he kind of talked about, if somebody pulls a gun, it doesn't matter how many cops are there or something along
Right.
those lines. And so it really is dependent upon the situation. Each individual situation is different. We've had situations where somebody isn't that combative, but they look like they might be. We end up bringing a bunch of people in and basically just surrounding them and taking them down. Then that many officers, it helps the situation. Sometimes somebody becomes combative when we're trying to take them into custody. If they change the situation and pull a weapon or pull a knife or something like that, it doesn't really matter if there's 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 or 10, that could escalate the amount of force that's necessary. So it really truly is dependent upon each individual situation itself and what that suspect is doing to cause an officer to use that force.
Yeah,
So it's a hard question to answer. There isn't a general way to
right,
answer that.
yeah,
It really is based off of the circumstances that they're dealing with at the time and the reaction that they're getting from the suspect.
yeah. I think one of the criteria for discussion here is, what was the force applied reasonable?
Sure, absolutely.
And that's kind of what's all over the interview and all over the documents. Is this reasonable? Could you define, Sergeant C mentions at some point glancing blows. I don't think I'm familiar with what glancing blows are.
I think what he's trying to explain there is that his intent was to strike, but those strikes didn't hit solidly. So they were it'd be kind of like a boxing term where like somebody goes to punch somebody, they move and it just kind of kicks off the end of their shin.
Sure.
Whereas the intent was to have a solid square hit.
Sure.
And that was what I got out of that. I read it today because it's been a bit since I've done that. So I just want to, get myself refreshed on it. But the glancing blow is typically used in a way that it wasn't what I didn't get the power or the strike that I intended. It was something that kind of came off to the side.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I want to note the nature of the difficulty of watching a video like this.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where I watched all of those videos multiple times, slowed them way down, paused them and I could have the ability to do kind of the frame by frame
yeah.
type deal, based off the capabilities of the recording equipment, obviously, but
Yeah,
I wasn't able to because of the kind of the close proximity to really tell where they hit, and on some of them I couldn't even tell if they hit or not. So that
Right.
was based off of his interview that's where that came from.
okay. Another question that I have is the way that Sergeant C described data entry.
Yep.
And as a term, as a measure of like EPD kind of policy and practices, it seems like I think you at this point in the interview were kind of disagreeing with how I confirmed with Officer C that Blue Team program does not allow the user to enter, quote, multiple strikes and instead requires the number of strikes to be entered on the form. Is that
Yeah.
something that you encounter often?
Not usually, no. I don't know that I've ever encountered it before, but I mean, I understand where he's coming from and I understand the capabilities of the program. It requires you to put how many strikes. And I think he said in there, if I recall correctly, like, I don't know, it was multiple. And so he couldn't put multiple, although he referred back to like, my report says multiple, but in this program, I had to enter a number in and I just picked 4 or something along those lines, if I recall correctly.
That's right, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they said 4.
Yeah, but I just noticed the discrepancy when I was going through the investigation and I knew it needed to be addressed, so that's why I brought it up in the interview.
Yeah,
Because clearly there were more than 4.
right,
And that's what he said, so I just, it wasn't that I felt like he was trying to withhold something because it was very clear in his report, which is the piece that's gonna go to the DA's office. It was just, I think it's more of a system issue than anything. Because the system doesn't allow him to put multiple and he didn't know how many for sure he did.
I mean, it didn't feel like you were trying to like pull the rug out from somebody here. And at the same time, I think it brings up an important, something that I hadn't really thought about in this scenario, which is, and I'm glad Sergeant Richards
Yes.
is here. Do we, in terms of defensive tactics, are we asking officers to take account of how many blows they're executing, or?
No, we don't ask them to do that. We understand that these situations are oftentimes high stress and you're not gonna remember things. I've had uses of force where I went back and I looked at my video and I'm like, I didn't remember X, Y, and Z happening. So we understand that. And oftentimes when they're writing their reports to make sure they're accurate, we want them to view their video. So we recommend that, but I'm not trying to tell them count in your head.
Sure. Yeah,
We're using force until the force no longer needs to be used. Or it needs to be changed to something else because it's either ineffective or it's had the effect that we want it to.
yeah, I think visually, when I look at this case, I see, when I see an officer, like switching hands and then using multiple kinds of blows, like different hands and then the needs, that's when I begin to think about like reasonableness here. I have a lot of questions, but I also want to make time for other board members, so I can come back and take up more time if I'm here. Go ahead.
Well, just on the piece about necessary and reasonable, the standard is like that Graham v. Connor situation. Case law. So it's interesting to me that, or it's really common that the officer had said that it doesn't matter how many officers are there, because it does matter how many officers were there. That impacts how much of a threat the suspect is, doesn't it? Can't it? It can. So that was notable. I also appreciated that you were talking about like there's sometimes we can do things within policy, but it doesn't look professional. The deputy chiefs talked about that too. Like it's being cognizant of the fact that you are sending a message to the public. So I appreciated that. You had talked about techniques that you use when like people are hiding their hands, and it's like shoving your knee in their arm.
I would be happy to show it.
Something like
Wow.
that.
Mark
But they're
Walters.
used to like techniques, like they are not just rough and tumble punching.
No, absolutely not. It's there are techniques that use leverage, and you basically push your knee on their elbow to try to
Yeah.
wing their arm out, and then you reach in and grab it, and
This is the training.
Can I clarify a little thing on that? Isn't that typically when somebody's on their stomach though,
yeah. So if they're standing
or on their back?
or on their back, it's generally when we teach handcuffing, and I can get into this as I present on handcuffing. When we're handcuffing a resistant person, we're generally trying to get them onto their stomach. That's the safest way for us to handcuff somebody, and it prevents their potential escape more easily. So on the back is a little bit different. There are always techniques, but those aren't ones that we generally focus on teaching. We have a very limited amount of time as to what we can present to officers. So we have to present the most likely scenario type stuff.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
With respect to training, I can only think, and it's more like a discussion, but like maybe they could talk about this idea of you might be within policy, but it looks violent, it looks aggressive. So like more trainings or discussions about image management, that might be helpful in this case.
Sounds like a good idea for February.
Can I go at the end? That's fine. I mean,
Yeah, that's fine.
if you have a bunch of questions,
Yeah.
you know, I already answered any questions I might have, but just, everyone has to ask their questions first.
Oh,
Or,
please, the floor is yours.
no, I'm trying to give the floor away.
Okay.
You can go last in the round, though.
Oh, sure, yeah.
We can be flexible for sure.
Yeah,
Can you remind me of the three things that I want to limit my?
policy, practices and
Yeah.
training.
Great, thank you. I mean, so the bane of my existence last month was something different, but this month it's reminding me of Graham and the fact that reasonableness always comes up in use of force. And for me, the telling feature is that there was not an internal complaint that was driven from the police department. And did I say the right name? Yeah, department, not bureau. And, there are multiple people looking at this, and then through the command, it was also deemed within policy. And for me, that tells me something about reasonableness as it pertains to a police officer and people within the chain of command, that those individuals think that this is a reasonable use of force. So my question is more about like, what is the thing that we can do about this? And I think what you mentioned about like, how do we talk about the vision of professionalism, even if something is within policy and we sort of all, I'm saying we as if I'm a police officer, but sort of the police department thinks that that is a reasonable way to approach this situation, that given the options of uses of force in that scenario. It's something that's really difficult to change policy wise because of Graham. And so the question is more for me about training and about sort of culture and what resources do officers and sergeants have in the field when they are encountering those really emergent situations such that they can choose other ways of gaining compliance. And I don't have an answer for that, but I think for me, it's not about policy necessarily. It's more about, because I think the policy is clear. It's more about training and evolving culture and policing. And I think, as you mentioned, in the past 12 years, or 15 years since 2009, when you started here, is that right? 2009. Things have changed substantially in how policing happens. And I think that that's sort of the long arc of maybe uses of force and responses to individuals with clearly some mental health issues and yeah, people in our community who are not going to be compliant immediately for a variety of reasons. So I don't really have recommendations about that, but that's just my commentary, general wildly ranging commentary on the subject.
Thank you, Blake.
Yeah.
Brittany?
I'm noticing that some of my thoughts and questions are more related to like the details surrounding the case and less related to the specific allegations. So I won't take a ton of time on this, but I still think it's worth noting if we think about some details where maybe this whole situation could have been avoided. I'm curious about, from what I understood, this the witness had calls previously and officers had gone out to visit this witness previously, but there was not probable cause before. And I wasn't super clear on the distinction between those calls and this one and like how that escalated. And why I bring that up is because and also it seems like there's a known history of this individual having some mental health stuff going on, even with those previous calls. So why I bring that up is wondering why, if Cahoots was called, and if not, why not, and like where and how does Cahoots and mobile crisis and a mental health intervention play into this situation leading up to this, and also just kind of trying to understand how this one escalated and was different than the previous incidences where there was no probable cause. So I assume the cops came and then left because there wasn't much more that they could do. So yeah, I think trying to find like a training related question in those are just kind of my meanderings, but wondering kind of from the EPD representatives in the room, how you would say Cahoots or mobile crisis could fit into this scenario.
So I can't speak to the previous calls because I didn't research them, so I don't know what those were for or why. I can say based off of my experience and what typically I see from dispatch criteria, the information that was provided by the victim in this case would not have, a Cahoots call would not have been an appropriate call for them to respond to that. He was calling her all sorts of horrible names. He had his finger over the keyhole or the hole of her door. He was throwing items at her door, trying to get into her perception of it, at least, was he was trying to get into her apartment. So once it reaches levels like that, that's usually a police response. Now sometimes Cahoots will respond and stand by, and we'll go in and make the scene safe. And then we do this all the time where we make the scene safe and then pass it off to Cahoots. In this case, he wasn't willing to come out of the apartment. I don't know about probable cause in the previous ones. All I know is that whoever the officers were that responded said they didn't develop that probable cause for anything. In this case, probable cause was developed for the disorderly conduct, which would have been the throwing items at the side of her door. One of the officers mentioned that he saw dents in the door, and then trying to get into her apartment, causing this what would be considered by definition of ORS disorderly conduct. So that was where they developed that probable cause in this case in particular. I apologize, but I can't speak to those previous ones. If this would have been one of those situations where it was a calm interaction and they were able to have a conversation with him, I could see where we could potentially, and we've done this before in the past, cite somebody for the crime of disorderly conduct and then hand them off to cahoots to deal with the mental health crisis piece of it, but this one just didn't work out that way.
Yeah,
And if I may, probably for future cases, because I think we're gonna, our trajectory, I feel from seeing the cases is the trajectory is gonna keep going up for the kind of encounters they have that you review, in which there's either a mental health crisis or a drug abuse crisis. And perhaps for our future internal investigators, that there is a reference to whether or not cahoots or Lane County, and that's another discussion. Cahoots is no longer the default, if you will. There's debate about whether Lane County should take the lead on these or whether Cahoots should take the lead on these. So having some sort of reference within the IA report of Cahoots was called or not called or wasn't called because, for example, a weapon might be involved, would probably be helpful for this board in the future to have that reference. Because I think there's a lot of, there's a lack of understanding in terms of the types of calls and things that Cahoots goes on in our community. I think it's, by many, it's considered the default response for someone in mental health crisis. And it's not the default response in the circumstances like Brian described, weapon or violence or
Victim.
yeah. So
When you have a willing person who wants to be a victim and they want prosecution, then that's gonna be our response. Again, like I said, I've seen it happen before. We've had times where we've cited somebody and didn't take them physically into custody and take them to jail, and we'll give them their citation, so they're still accountable for that crime because the victim wants them to be. And then we hand them off to Cahoots for the mental health piece or Lane County for the mental health piece. But this just wasn't one of those that ended up that way.
and you don't have the Johnson unit anymore, correct? At the hospital, at the ex-hospital, the former hospital?
It's a behavioral health unit, but it's, I don't know, you may be able to speak to this more than me, but it's very difficult to get people in there.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you for that. And I totally hear and appreciate the rationale. I just was looking for that. So I appreciate the call out that could be considered in the future. And I would add to that we could also learn if and how deflection was considered, as that becomes more of a routine option with it being a new resource in the community too. And a very quick detour, we do have the behavioral health unit, formerly the Johnson unit. Admit goes through the emergency department, which of course is problematic with our reduced amount of access to emergency rooms, which is why we are standing up the 24/7 crisis center in a couple years. So happy to elaborate on that outside of this meeting. But one other training related piece, I remembered reading something about the use of force versus taser or pepper spray, and that there's evidence of somebody's mental health state that can impact kind of how, I guess, that dictates the impact of pepper spray or taser. So if somebody is actively psychotic or on a certain substance, maybe they won't be as heavily impacted by that taser or pepper spray, if I understood correctly. And so there might be a justification for a quicker use of force. So if I'm getting that correctly, if I'm understanding that, and I'm wondering what is the training for how you would identify if someone is presenting with possibly that sort of mental health or substance use condition that would indicate, like, don't bother with one of these lower level interventions because they won't work on someone in this state.
So that was, and I know what you're speaking to, because thankfully I read this today because I did need to refresh my memory. That was his personal experience that he described in that interview. It isn't something, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Tyler, it isn't something that we necessarily have trained or considered differently. The pepper spray in particular, and he didn't say this in his interviews, he didn't hear this, but what I can tell you based off of my 23 years of experience, if there's 4 officers and you're all in that really close proximity, the last thing you want to do is use pepper spray because it's going to affect everybody there. He didn't use those words, but I know that because that's what I've done for so many years. He stated that his experience with tasers on people with mental health crisis has not been successful. And the other thing that he stated too was which is another reason why he didn't use the taser, was because it would have been a pain compliance versus what we consider neuromuscular incapacitation, which is the seizing of the muscles in between the two darts, which is what we're trying to accomplish, because then that makes somebody stop doing whatever the behavior is that they're doing. But because of the close proximity, all he would have been able to use is just the two probes, which are very close to each other, and it would have caused pain, but it wouldn't have caused him to, his muscles to seize up to where we could take control of him under that seize time. So that was the second piece to the taser. But it isn't, and again, Tyler, correct me, I'm like keep rambling here, but it isn't something that we teach necessarily, from my understanding. It's just his personal experience. Is that accurate?
Sounds accurate.
Yeah, okay.
And then on what you're saying regarding the use of taser, wasn't the intended goal of the punches also pain compliance?
It was, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think either one of those tools, that's what he, and I believe he said that what he was trying to do was cause watering of the eyes, cause, the shock, and have him stop doing the behavior that he was doing. So it's a choice of tools. He chose the fists instead of the taser.
Okay. Thank you. That's all.
I have a lot to say about this one, apparently. I just keep thinking of more things. Okay, first, I do want to say that while the officers were at the door speaking with the, what are we calling this person? Suspect. That was good. There was a lot of good de-escalation conversations. I was impressed to see that. Okay, so that I'll start with that. That was a good thing. So a sergeant is higher than an officer.
Correct.
Is there an expectation that a sergeant should be setting a really good example when they're out with officers, including, I think there was a trainee with an FTO? Are sergeants held to a higher standard or?
Supervisor typically holds a higher standard, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
That's concerning, because I don't know that that was an example that I would like to be setting to new trainees. And then also, you mentioned the monkey brain kicks in and you punch and you don't really think about it. I understand that. Like, if you get kicked in the head,
Pardon me.
you're gonna want to hit back. 9 punches and 2 or 3 knees feels very excessive to me for a monkey brain. Like, that goes beyond monkey brain and you're like in full crocodile brain. Right? Like, a lot lower in evolution. I think also this guy was barefoot. He wasn't gonna run far. I feel like there could have been a lot more de-escalation, a lot of different things could have happened to gain control of this suspect. It seemed like a fenced area for the most part, and there were so many officers that a perimeter could have been set up that could have been more strategic to not letting this person get away, especially when they were barefoot. And then finally, Sergeant C said, when asked what it felt like when they were kicked, they said, I was dazed. It just felt like almost like a cloud. Like, it just, a little bit. It's one of those things. I've done a lot of those of training, and as a defensive instructor, and honestly, it shocked me. I shouldn't have got caught in it, but I did. I'm glad that it didn't hit me as hard as it did. If it had hit me any lower, I probably would have been out of that fight. And there's a good chance it probably would have knocked me out. This officer, sergeant, was dazed. I don't know why they were still the one kind of in charge of the situation. I don't know. If you get kicked in the head, maybe that is where you back up. And it was also a perceived, I didn't, watching the video, I wasn't sure that the other officer that Sergeant C was saying was like hit before. I didn't see that.
In the interview, the other officer said that he wasn't, that was his perception, that was Sergeant C's perception that he got hit.
Yeah,
From his angle, from his perspective, he thought that was the case. He actually, what the officer said in their interview was he was pushed, he shoved him. And his perception was he was trying to get back in the house and was trying to push him out of the way.
right. Okay, I mean, I understand like perception is different when you're in there and like we can watch the video from 10 different angles and understand what really happened. But if, okay, so this is actually a question for you guys. If somebody is kicked in the face, would you recommend that they back off and let the other 5 officers?
That's a tough question to answer, because it's all about your perception of what's going on at the time.
Mhm.
This was very dynamic in the fact that he perceived, at least in his interview, he said he perceived that an officer got punched by him. He didn't know, if you recall, there was another officer that was quite a ways away that came into the scene. So at the time, he's behind the officer that he believes got punched and he's the next one behind him. He doesn't know where that officer went because he's focused on what he's doing there, which you do kind of tend to get hyper focused in situations like that. And then if there was a perception that there were all these people here that could do that, sure. I mean, I could see stepping away from it.
Mhm.
Typically in the middle of the fight though, unless you're incapacitated or not able to continue, our expectation would be you continue. Now, where we want you detached is afterwards. We don't want you taking this person to the jail. We don't want you, because you just had this incident happening. We don't want you to be around that person because there's a potential that it could
Right,
fester things and make you angry,
Sure.
and, you know, bad things could happen. So we always try to remove somebody who's directly involved with that conflict after the conflict is over. So yeah, I would say you remove yourself if you're unable to continue. I don't believe in this case he was unable to continue. So that one didn't surprise me too much as far as you get in this thing and you get this person into custody and you make the scene safe and then you evaluate yourself afterwards.
okay,
Would you agree, Dylan?
Yeah, and one thing that I would just add to that is I don't feel like I work patrol still. So in these situations, the things that are constantly on my mind is like, I don't have the luxury to step away necessarily. Like sometimes like my decisive action in the moment is what prevents this from going to an even higher level of force, right? It's always on my mind of like, I don't want somebody potentially accessing a weapon, which is like the worst thing that, that can happen. And then we potentially have to shoot somebody. I want to de-escalate the situation by using force quickly when necessary, and then getting that person into custody as fast as possible and completely like rendering that a non-issue from there.
Okay.
So the luxury of stepping back, I don't think is a realistic ask.
okay, I think it doesn't sit well to me to know that there are dazed officers punching people multiple times. That just, as a civilian, I don't like to hear that. And I guess a follow-up is, in the video, there's, I think the officer who like ran in from the side, they had their hand on the back of one of the other officers that was helping to control the suspect. So there were at least, and then there was another one behind Sergeant C. When would you expect one of these other officers to step in and be like, whoa, like, stop wailing on this guy?
If they perceive it to be excessive,
Okay.
there's a legal requirement for them to
Mhm.
step in and do that.
And I think you did ask, and I just can't recall, did any of those officers say that they thought it was excessive? Do you remember?
I mean, in the interviews, no, I mean, those questions were asked and no.
Okay. I'm done.
And just one extra thing here,
Sure.
just for you, when you have that many people and you have this situation, sometimes there's no place for those guys to go.
Mhm.
And so they're standing there and they're ready to jump in with something if they see an opportunity to, but like you can only fit so many people in that little area.
Right,
where
it looked reasonable to me that they were there. Like, I didn't think that they were like
I just
not
wanted to-
doing their job.
Perfect.
But I did. I mean, it would have been nice for one of them to be like, hey. Stop, please. That's what I would do. I don't know what I would do.
Sarah,
That might work.
you don't have to be done.
I'm done.
Noah, would you like to jump in?
And then for a commentary, I think most of the questions regarding practices and training have been asked. So we'll need to specifically go there. I don't know if anything else specifically in those three topics. When there was, we talked about, or you mentioned de-escalation, is that a practice that the police department implements or trains officers in de-escalation tactics or like crisis intervention tactics?
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's mixed within all of our disciplines as well. So it's mixed within firearms and BTs, and even we mix it in where we can in our driving training too. We have a specific de-escalation policy. We have a CIT policy, and we do 40-hour CIT classes with our officers too. Yep.
CIT.
Crisis intervention. Yep. Sorry, acronyms. We live on acronyms.
We have a bunch of questions. Let's see it.
Are you sure?
Go.
I noticed does the department have a policy about, this is kind of semi-related, the use of the thin blue line flag?
I'm not aware of
I'm
it.
not aware of that.
Okay.
Good question.
I noticed it on one of the officers' service cell phones with like the Punisher skull and stuff like that. That was just something that I was wondering about in terms of like policy.
And I don't know, I would be surprised if there was a policy, but I know that there are department events with like that memorabilia.
Yeah. And I bring that up just as a question because, again, I really appreciate, Ryan, your attention to how specific behaviors communicate things to the community. And I think that is really one of the, kind of essences of this board is to think about how the community, it's like an interface between the community and the police department. So that was just a question in terms of policy that I had.
I'm not aware of it, but there's some that I don't know.
Yeah.
There's a policy on emblems and things, but I don't know how specific. It's in there somewhere, about. Symbols. And what's permitted and what's not permitted. I think American flag is permitted.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I don't remember the policy, but I know there's a policy in there.
The reason I asked about this is because last month we had a case where the service issued cell phone was a kind of central piece of the use of the cell phone. It was different. It was about
Sections.
it was about evidence being destroyed.
Okay, well, what were they destroying?
The text messages.
Yeah, you guys are both right. It's fine.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, that's why that was on my mind. Okay, I think I grabbed a screenshot, so if that's something that interests you, I'd be happy to let you know
Sure.
after the meeting.
It is a violation of flag code, just saying.
Federally.
Yeah.
You went to the flag running, it's like,
Okay, we're gonna move on to round 3. And in this round, we kind of discuss our assessment on the adjudication. So, or is that round 4, Ryan? Do we do that afterwards?
Well, you guys will talk about it and then we'll do an actual
Yeah,
vote to make
okay.
it easier.
Yeah, so we'll have a round of discussing kind of adjudication where we stand on that. And then after that, we'll do a round where we state.
Makes
So-
it easier for the recorder and for us to stats.
Rob, would it be possible to bring up the allegations? Just
Sure.
3
That'd
policies.
be really helpful.
That's great.
Look at that, ready to go. Like I know what I'm doing. That'll
And
never
Brittany-
happen. That'll never happen again.
Even a clock is right twice a day.
That's right.
Brittany, do you need to see that or are you okay?
I'm not sharing my screen with her, so.
It's all right. I've got them in front of me.
Okay, okay.
Monique,
Mhm.
our round robin style would put you first to start out this round.
Okay, so I would say that well, first, I think it's notable, like Brittany pointed out earlier, that the officers involved in this case didn't think that they witnessed an excessive use of force. And that was pretty much consistent throughout the adjudication. Whereas like it was literally the flip for the auditor's office. They saw something perhaps concerning at the very beginning and were consistent throughout the end, coming to a different conclusion. One thing I'll note for Noah and Brittany is when there is a disagreement between the auditor and the chief. Sometimes, usually this is the first time that we've not had a representative from the chief's area give us an explanation as to the difference or a justification as to the difference in the conclusions. Just based off what I heard, I think we'll go around and vote, but I think that there was an excessive use of force. I don't really understand the professionalism, but I do think that there's an excessive use of force with respect to the focus blows and the knee strikes.
Thank you. Would you like to go now or would you like to? You sure?
I agree, yeah, I agree with Monique on the use of force. That was, I don't know, that's to the professionalism question where I am currently confused. That's why I asked earlier of how exactly that fit in. Was it the use of force was unprofessional? And maybe that's why I'm lost. I just don't.
Like what behavior was not professional?
The totality of it. I mean, it's been a minute since we came up with these allegations, so I can't say exactly what we were discussing then. So how it would work with Leah when she was the auditor is we would see something, we'd flag it, and then we would talk it out. That discussion happened a year and a half ago. So I really can't remember the exact details, but just the totality of the situation that it should have been better. And the standard is higher for supervisor too.
I have no issue with that as an answer. It's just.
No, I mean, it's like I'm racking my brain trying to remember what was said, but I just don't exactly.
Well, in the adjudication, I mean, it does speak to that a little bit if you read Rob's adjudication, right?
Mhm.
Do you want me to share that?
Yes.
Okay. So EPD standards, duties and conduct policy, section 103.4.2, professionalism states employees will always provide courteous service, use carefully reasoned discretion, and will ensure their conduct is respectful, neutral, objective, and unbiased. In their IA interview, Sergeant C stated they believed their actions were justified and explained their thoughts during the incident. Sergeant C denied they violated policy. Courage, integrity, and compassion is the Eugene PD motto. I believe Sergeant C's actions were below the established professionalism standard of EPD. I also believe any objectively reasonable person who conducted a review of the IA investigation would share the same belief. I recommend allegation 3 be sustained. I don't know if that helps.
That's my opinion. This was written by Leah though, so that's why I don't remember the discussion that came out from there.
For me, the final allegation hinges on neutrality, I think, and this idea that was the sergeant going into the circumstance with a bias sort of toward that led to a higher use of force than was necessary. And I don't know that like I could judge that, but I think that's where other people in law enforcement might be able to judge that better. Whether there was like a neutral ground that sergeant was coming toward the situation with, I guess, or a neutral mentality. That's how I read that, but I don't know if that's how that policy is intended. For me, I I agree with everything that's being said, but I have to agree with the chain of command here because I am like, historically, I have, as a community member, I would feel that these should be sustained, but the fact that it is based on a reasonable, like a reasonableness standard, that other officers don't think that that was an unreasonable use of force, or that that was, you know, I'm not sure about the third allegation, but that a variety of other officers think that that was reasonable. To me, I think in terms of policy, it needs to be within policy. But you are a former law enforcement officer, right?
Yes.
And so how did you come to decide that you thought that this was an unreasonable use of force in that, with that perspective in mind?
And after doing I think I wrote the memo, something along the lines, but I think a certain amount of force is to be expected in that.
Yeah.
But I thought the amount used
Was too
was
much.
beyond that, but I also want to be fair to Sergeant C. I wasn't there. I mean,
Yeah.
there's certainly an effort as to what Tyler and Richard.
Yeah.
I mean, and Ryan said about, or I don't think they specifically brought it up, but that's one thing that's extremely difficult about what we do. We have the benefit of hindsight.
Yeah.
So I can watch from all these angles, and I wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
So my perspective is different than Sergeant C's, but yeah, with what I thought from reviewing the case, I thought it was beyond what was reasonable and from the investigation.
Yeah.
This is what's weird to me about this job now, is that I've never written my opinion before. I mean, I have affidavits and things like that, but I've never written my opinion. So that's is odd here.
Yeah.
For sure. It's evidence and facts.
Mm-hmm.
Evidence and facts, that's everything. So this is, yeah, there's some of my opinion in there. And I thought it passed the line for reasonable with
Yeah.
the other officers there, with the amount of force that was used. That was what I thought.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Well, and I know you, Sergeant, you don't know the case, right?
Right.
Are you able to describe an opinion that you have on this use of force? Or is that inappropriate?
I think you're pushing it. for
Yeah,
him.
yeah.
I mean, I feel. a
That- and
little
that's fine,
awkward
yeah.
asking that question. I don't mean to.
No, I
step
think
on
that's-
Ryan or anything, but.
Yeah.
I mean, this is difficult. We weren't there. I mean, there's definitely a concern about getting hurt. I've been in some tough spots before too, and it happens, it does, but yeah, I don't think it's fair. to
Yeah.
ask Ryan's opinion up here. I like you, no disrespect or anything, but no, I don't think that's fair.
Yeah. So with that, it's, I've never been in a fight, to be honest, like not a one. So I have no concept of what that would be like. And I can't, I have a hard time saying that it's a violation of policy if all the other law enforcement people who have sort of stated, well, aside from you, have stated that this is reasonable, that it would be deemed unreasonable in terms of policy. So that's where I'm at.
I think you made a point, if I may chime in. I've done hundreds of use of force cases. And brawls are just different. And, thankfully, this wasn't just a one-on-one, because I've seen officers killed and I've seen community members killed in one-on-one brawls, where hopefully we have people who are smart enough not to get into those one-on-one brawls at 2 a.m. But I concur with, at the end, there might have been an opportunity for a stopping point. And by the same token, it's, again, especially in a one-on-one brawl, which can happen. Especially with our manpower issues, you might not know when backup's going to show up, is they have to win. Because if they don't win, then they would be the one that might likely end up dead. And I've seen officers end up dead in one-on-one brawls. So you have to make sure that you win. And that might sometimes, in hindsight, cross a line. But in the moment, but in this particular situation, you have the fence is the barrier there. He had other officers, so I think at the end, there was a couple that, were I thought were beyond what is required in the policy. But in that moment in time, how does he know? That's the other then dilemma is how does he know what that, you know, because you can see some of his punches did not make. And if you ask Mike Tyson how many punches he threw in round one against so-and-so, he's not gonna know how many punches he threw. And he's gonna switch hands because his other hand is weary. And so all those circumstances play into that spur of the moment kind of thing. But those last few at the end were pretty questionable. I think.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Brittany?
Yeah, I appreciate the comments shared. I struggled to come to a conclusion as well. I think what stood out to me was risk factors, and that seemed to be like one of the bigger distinctions around what how EPD evaluated this versus the auditor team. And what I had noted is that EPD counted the risk as more about the witness potentially having a weapon and the verbal threats that were made, where the auditor was reviewing the risk as being more about the witness being able to escape or not, and that then EPD found a higher risk in the possibility of a weapon. An auditor's office saw a lower risk because the escape route, due to the fence, number of people, bare feet, whatever, was quite a bit lower. So that those two observations, which is what I pulled out, seemed notable to me. I don't remember reading or watching much that indicated a lot of the witness reaching for a weapon. I know that there were accounts of previous possessions of a knife or something on previous calls, but I'm not clear that that there was enough of an indicator that there was a high likelihood of a weapon to justify that level of force. So I'm trying really hard to come to a conclusion here. But I would agree that it's difficult. And I guess what I would say ultimately, I know we'll vote and I'll decide, but ultimately what I would say is that I would hope that with the previous calls, which I understand we don't know the context or outcomes, that this person would have been routed toward care and treatment, and that this situation would have just been prevented altogether. And I will say, treatment, typically effective mental health treatment, is voluntary and not always perfect. It doesn't fix everything. So it's not guaranteed that would have prevented this, but with there being multiple encounters with this individual that has apparently a mental health condition, that's my vote, is that this never would have happened. And that this is an indicator of our system and the gaps that our system has in immediate access to the right types of care.
Thank you, Brittany.
I always like your perspective, Brittany. Thank you. I know that we'll get to it in the end, but I think I really thought it was interesting to think about the totality of the situation. And I would say that I think that using force was warranted. But I would agree that I think this was too much force, and that they didn't need to go that far. The control had been gained by the time half of the blows were attempted. And I don't know that it matters if they hit or not. I think if you try to hit, that's what matters. I mean, I've never been in a fight either though, so. But you want to go fight?
We can practice.
What's the betting line?
I think we'll both lose.
Exactly.
I'm waiting for Tyler to put Brian on a control hold.
I know.
I'll pay for that one. Armbar's hurt.
They do.
I want to start my comments by noting that in the interview, on page 12 of 19, it states I asked Officer, F if they recalled any knee strikes. I have no recollection of that. I asked Officer F if the level of resistance from suspect was different than what they had experienced over the last 25 years. Officer F told me they believe the scuffle with suspect was average for somebody who was resisting arrest. I thought that was a really interesting comment here and gives us some insight about the, perception from a different officer who was involved here. Average for someone who's resisting arrest. So I want to know then, is the use of force here also average? And that's not a scientific criteria. It's not generalizable, but it is one part of this, I think. Is this an average use of force, given that this is what Officer F perceived? More so, okay, here we go, 2 paragraphs down. Can I use your name, Rob?
Sure.
Eller had me ask Officer F if they ever witnessed suspect reach for any of Sergeant C's, thank you, equipment during the struggle. Officer F told me they did not witness suspect do this. So I think I need to remind myself that we're not assessing officers' memories here. There's a lot of legal and scientific research that shows us that even witness testimony is highly unreliable. And so I want to say that that's not necessarily what I'm assessing here, is what an individual officer remembered, because I think you're right to remind us that when your amygdala is activated, your body is telling your consciousness to like take a back seat. In that case, what we did witness is some good examples of training. Sergeant C wasn't using like kicks to the face. Sergeant C wasn't using like service weapons to the face. I mean, it does seem like Sergeant C was using some training that is, muscle memory. And I think that that's important and good to highlight here. We want to see in these situations where, the body's taking over, kind of like athletes, right? Like athletes say all the time, like we want to train our bodies to be in the position so that we don't have to think about it in those like high intensity situations. And I think we see some of that here. Perhaps there was a moment where where some kind of line, it went farther than what we want the training to put into into an officer's body. I want to note here that, down at the bottom of this document, right before we get to the where is it? Right before we get to the actual policies, I don't know what part of the document this is actually called.
That might be the blue team, like with the diagrams of the body.
It says involved officers.
Yeah, that'd be a blue team.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry,
I just
I'm looking
want-
over your shoulder.
No, thank you. Yeah, I just want to note that a captain. This is what a captain had written on the 28th of July. Oh my gosh.
You're good.
Concussion brain. Wrote, this UOF follows attempts to de-escalate this person and to use the element of surprise to gain tactical advantage. Suspect here almost immediately and deliberately strike Sergeant C in the face and announces this to the other officers. The tactics employed from there have officers on top of the suspect, but having difficulty controlling their limbs. Sergeant C appears to be the only one employing reportable force with a series of focused blows to the face and head and knee strikes. Based upon the question of proportionality, this merits more investigation. And by proportionality, do you think proportionality there means like the ratio of officers to suspect, or?
I don't know what they meant by that.
Okay.
The force was justified to the scene.
Not sure what they meant by that.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, that's not a standard term that we would use. so
Sure, yeah,
I can't speak to what they were trying
okay.
to say there.
And then I thought it was also interesting that DC Adams said the use of and continued use of closed fist strikes appears to be outside of training and good decision making. Other than the initial kick at Sergeant C, I see no additional violent force used by the suspect on the BWC footage. So I think that there is some, at least initial disagreement here. And that maybe there's not as much, agreement that this is, I don't know, an easy case to adjudicate. I don't think it's an easy case to adjudicate either. I mean, I think what I see is two officers holding down suspect while, from what I saw in the video, the suspect is kind of in this position with like an arm loose, and then, there's blows like this, and then a couple of knee strikes. So yeah, I don't know. I want to know if this was an average amount of use of force for someone resisting arrest. It doesn't appear to me, again, not as an officer, but as somebody watching the video, that this was going to escalate with three officers and one suspect. Yeah, it's a 3v1 for all. I don't know. I also want in these situations, when I'm bringing this level of scrutiny, I don't just simply want to like prioritize the needs of somebody who's committed a crime, that's also the material conditions here. But also, I've said this before in other meetings. I think a lot about like officers as workers and the working conditions that they live and work in, and also as a matter of policy, want to think about how to protect EPD from liability as well. And the training recommendations that I make, I want it to be seen as like a broad matrix, taking care of suspects' well-being, but also officers as workers as well-being, and in addition to that, like thinking about, shielding and protecting the department from liability and the city and the taxpayers from liability too. So there's a lot to consider there. And I just want to say that when I make these comments, I'm trying to like broadly lasso a lot of these considerations in, but that's where I'm at. Thank you, Monique.
Just on that last point about preserving the department's or protecting the department from liability. I think in one meeting I said I hope that the officers that were subjected to sexual misconduct did sue. So I don't have that. I don't have that same.
It's a different context.
Yeah. You didn't get an answer to your question of whether this was an average level use of force. I would maybe say like, is it common or typical for officers to use focus blows? Average like implies that there was some kind of calculation. But yeah, so like are focus blows common?
I wouldn't say it's uncommon, again, without knowing the totality of everything that occurred. I haven't looked at the video, I haven't looked at this case at all. So I can't articulate, the justifiable nature of it. But it's not uncommon for folks to use.
Yeah.
Can I
Yeah.
add something? Just as I'm listening to you guys talk, it's just something that I just want you guys to at least hear and consider. I've been here 23 years. I've been in a lot of fights, not for a long time because I drive a desk now. Tyler's still out on the street, but I am very, very concerned if I have somebody on the ground with their back on the ground, facing up towards me with them taking a stance with their feet up in the air and they've got their hands available with their feet available. Like Tyler had mentioned earlier, the goal is to get somebody on their stomach because we have a lot more control. We can sit on, we can dogpile, we can do all those things. They don't have their hands to hit you with and potentially pull stuff out of their waistband and stab you or shoot you or things like that. So this one in particular, and I hadn't thought about it until I listened to you guys talk, but I'm very uncomfortable fighting with somebody who's on their back. So that heightens my concerns as far as somebody getting hurt because they have access to you, they have access to them, they've got feet, they've got hands. So just something to consider when you're in this. Most of the time, when we get somebody down on the ground, I would say almost all of the time, we get them on their stomach and that's where we're dealing with them. Then we have a little more time. Yeah, we're concerned that they can pull something out, but I mean, it's not easy to reach around and hurt somebody with something in their hand. They can pull something out, reach out to the side. Sure, we've got that concern. It's still very concerning, but it's much more concerning when somebody goes on their back. And also another consideration is typically when we see something like that, I don't believe this was that case, but it's usually somebody who is well versed in ground fighting. And so that even heightens our concern even more because that's the position you want to be in if you're on the ground is on your back. And we actually teach that to our recruits is that if you go down, get on your back because that's the best way that you can fight with somebody who's above you. So I'm just throwing that out there as a consideration, something to think about. The other piece that I think is important to understand and to know is that, and I've gone through this training before, but perception reaction. So when you perceive something versus how much time it takes for your brain to recognize it and then your body to do it, that can go two different directions. We see it a lot in officer-involved shootings, where the officer perceives a threat, they draw their gun or bring up their rifle. First round goes into the ground because their brain's like, pull the trigger, pull the trigger, pull the trigger. They aren't even on target. So off the ground, on a leg, on a shoulder, then on target or something along those lines. The same thing happens when you're looking at stopping some sort of a high stress situation you're in. So if you perceive something, you're punching, it takes a minute, not a minute, but split seconds to make that understanding of, okay, I see this change, now I need to stop doing what I'm doing. And when you're in the middle of doing that, it has been scientifically proven, you can look up the research on it, but it takes a minute for you to actually stop whatever that action is that you're doing. So what I look at this one is, if we're really splitting hairs as to when should you stop, when should you not stop, at least consider a high stress situation that an officer is in and their perception of what's going on and when that may have changed for them and how much time did they have to react and change what they were doing. So just something to throw out as a thought.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Back to the question of like whether it's like common, my perception is that perhaps maybe the majority of incidences between officers and civilians don't result in focus blows, but that it happens probably several times a month. Would that be accurate?
Can I just refer you to the annual report that I do every
Yes,
year?
please.
It's online and last year all the years will have the stats specifically on all the reportable uses of force, including focus blows. I don't have it in my brain, like how many we had last year, but they are used.
Yeah.
But the majority of contacts that law enforcement have with people result in no force.
Yes.
So the ones that do result in force, there's a variety of force options that are used.
Thank you.
Answer for you in a few minutes.
Oh, there you go.
Okay. Are we voting now?
I think we should vote.
Yeah, okay. So I'll vote sustained on all three allegations. Yeah. Oh, you can vote. You agree. Oh, wait, actually, I just said that all wrong. I vote sustained with all the allegations and agree with the auditor. You can say whether or not you agree with the auditor and the chief. You do sustained and what they do within policy.
Yeah, within policy. Or you
Or you
can,
can split.
or you can throw out another one.
Sure can. Say what they say.
You can, another outcome is insufficient evidence for sustained. So, yeah.
If I can read all, but I'm not a visual flow chart person, so. I would say my vote is within policy for allegation 1, sustained for allegations 2 and 3.
Yeah, I'm struggling, like, what's my role per Jose's introduction to the conversation, about just bringing community perspective? Because I do think, like, honestly, I think that as a perception of an event, I feel like it's an excessive use of force, but in terms of policy, it's not. So I'm gonna say that I agree with, the first 2 allegations being within policy, but the third allegation being sustained.
Brittany?
I would say within policy, I agree for the first two and then the insufficient evidence for the third.
I'm going to agree with the auditor and say sustained for all three.
This is, my recommendations would be, sustain insufficient evidence. And I just want to note that I think that this is probably the most, disagreement we've had in terms of policy recommendations. Not policy recommendations, excuse me, adjudication recommendations. Which we can unpack that later, but I tend to think that that's a good thing that we would have broad community perspective represented here. I would like to invite, oh my gosh, Sergeant
Richards.
Richards.
You want me to clarify two things for you real super quick that you had questions about?
Yes, please, and then we'd
Real
love for you to,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, real quick.
make a presentation.
So they have a policy on the, you were asking about branding, which is poorly written in my opinion.
Thank you, Mark.
Tattoos and or branding are allowed unless they advocate or symbolize discrimination based on gender, sexual orientation, racial, religious, ethnic, or national origin, or related intolerances prohibited by law. This is the second part that I'm not thrilled about. Members who display a tattoo or branding that is sexually suggestive, explicit, profane, or contains obscene material or language must conceal the tattoo wearing a long sleeve shirt or neutral cosmetic covering. So it intimates that it's okay as long as it's covered up, unless your shirt gets torn in a fight or something. So, not how I would have written it, but wanted to clarify that. And clarify your other point, and Cindy didn't know that. I want to point
I
that
thought
out.
it was, I didn't think it had anything to do with tattoos.
Yeah, I had tattoo. and
No, I mean-
branding. No, there's
know
a
what
brand,
he was saying.
he was talking about branding.
Oh,
The thin blue line
So you would argue
symbol?
that it falls under this branding policy?
Yeah, it falls under the branding, and then it
So we're not talking
sort
about,
of
like,
morphs
brand-
than the tattoos.
Does does branding and tattoos refer to the body? Or is this like on
It just
service?
says or branding, that's what I mean, it's
It
not.
could be like wearing.
Yeah, I think it's talking
Not
about like
well written.
advertising branding, since physical branding.
Like a hat with
Tattoo
Common.
or branding, but it's, to me, branding is branding, and again, I wouldn't have written this down, but. so-
Symbols? Is that, do you think what the like intended signification here is symbols rather than just branding? Like trademarks?
Yeah, again, that's not mentioned in their policy.
Yeah, maybe it's okay, agree, thank you, Mark.
Yeah, and then, for your question, so they had, 130, last year, 138 incidents of force, 168 uses of force, 45, so 25% with focus blows and 25% with tase. So.
Thank
There you
you.
go, about 25%.
Thank you. It's common, but it's not.
And I
Doesn't
think,
happen in the majority of cases.
yeah, 168, that's a pretty good sample to work off of. I wouldn't be surprised if that was, it's actually probably trended down a little bit compared to maybe 5 to 6 years ago.
All right,
So sorry to interrupt there, Mr. Chair.
Sergeant Richards,
Yes, sir.
please.
having me.
Thank you.
All right.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You don't get a hand up.
That's up here.
Sure,
Please.
or stand, whatever,
Yeah, right.
I'll stand if that's okay.
Sure.
So what I kind of wanted to do here is give you some basic understanding about what we do as far as handcuffing and use of FRDs, which is a flexible restraint device. And, then really answer any sort of questions you guys might have about if then situations with regards to handcuffing, when would you do this versus this? And kind of just open the floor up to you guys. So 3 main things that we carry. Every officer is issued a set of handcuffs. They usually have like a chain between the two of them, the ones that are issued. And then these hinged ones are easier sort of to apply. They don't flip around where the thin portion doesn't change sides, if you will, like it would on a chain. So a lot of officers buy these. This is my primary set of handcuffs, the ones that I use it the vast majority of arrests. And I'll talk about later, like why I would use chain versus hinge.
Did you say, I'm sorry, officers buy those? Those aren't issued?
So they get issued one set. Every officer is required to carry two.
Oh,
But the one that's issued is chained. And these are generally purchased by the officer, the hinged handcuffs.
so they would issue two chained if,
No, I was only issued one set of handcuffs when I was hired. Maybe they've changed it since, but I had to purchase these on my own, so. Handcuff key. This is the unlock portion, the top here. A clip to clip it on whatever gear you have. And then this portion on the back is for double locking. So this is my double lock slot. Some of them are like a slot on the side that you move them back and forth. But when I push this in with the small end, it prevents the handcuff from closing. The way I get rid of that is I twist it and now I can open it back up. So, and then this is the flexible restraint device. And I can talk about how this would be applied later, but it's staged with a wide loop so that it can be slipped over somebody's ankles, resistant person's ankles. And then it's connected to the handcuffs in a manner that prevents them from extending their legs straight and kicking.
Are there different versions of that?
I'm sure there are. This is a very old one. This was issued to me. I don't know if they're issuing something different or not right now. So
One in the case that we reviewed might have been a bit different.
A little different.
yeah.
So I'll just talk about conceptually handcuffing, right? So when I speak about handcuffing with officers and I teach them, I kind of talk to them about three different types of handcuffing. There's low risk handcuffing, unknown risk handcuffing, and high risk handcuffing. So low risk handcuffing would, coming up with a scenario would be like, I've dealt with the person. I know this guy. I know he's got a warrant. He knows he's got a warrant. And he says, hey, officer, I got a warrant. You know, you're going to run my name and you're going to find out. He knows that the handcuffs are going on, that I don't have a choice. He knows that everything's coming. So he's cooperative with me, if that makes sense. In that situation, I generally have him, hey, yeah, you're right. You got a warrant. Just go ahead, turn around, put your hands behind your back and interlace your fingers. So I would have them stand up in a position like that. And I would, to where the wrists are close together, and I would grab a couple fingers and then I would apply the handcuffs to them. As soon as I'm done, I get them on them. I push these, double lock them, check them for proper fit and placement, which I'll do this on myself. If I am applying the handcuff, where I will apply it is I have this bone right here, and I want it to be between the bone of the wrist, this upper bone of the wrist, and then this larger thumb bone. So I'll apply it this way, and then I squeeze it tight enough, and then I check this thin blade, make sure that I can touch my fingers between the thin blade. Once that's done, I lock it. I don't want it to get tighter on them. Take them to jail or whatever I'm going to do with them, and then I remove the handcuffs. The second type of handcuffing is unknown risk handcuffing, which is going to be the lion's share of what we do. And we generally teach it as a 2-officer handcuffing. It can also be known as a single officer handcuffing. We always, again, advocate that 2 officers are doing it at once. We know that if a fight's going to happen, the most likely time a fight's going to happen is during arrest. So we want to be very decisive about what we do. We want to communicate with the other officer, let them know, hey, we're gonna take this person into custody and we want to get control of their limbs before they have the opportunity to resist, right? Does anybody want to volunteer? I promise I will not hurt. All right.
This is, we always.
Oh, it's the new guy. Yes. So,
He'll never come back.
So, for unknown risk handcuff,
Excuse me.
oh, yeah, absolutely. For unknown risk handcuffing, what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna, if I'm a single officer, I'm gonna just grip the hand right here, and then I'm gonna turn the palm towards me. Okay? From here, I'm gonna step, like shake the hand, right? And then I won't apply pressure, but I could apply pressure inward, and that gives like some pressure to the elbow. If they're being resistive, all right, this is, they call it Sankajo handcuffing. So, once I get there, my handcuffs are stowed away. I grab the hand, present the palm, I shake his hand. Then from here, I would apply the handcuff. And then the other officer has the other arm. We bring it back, I apply the handcuff there. Okay, once that's done and it's behind his back, again, he's got easy joint bone to see. I'm checking between this bone and this bone here, making sure that it's not gonna go up. See, that could go just a little bit tighter. I don't want it to like slip up, and then I check my fingers between those blades. And then I double lock it, so it doesn't get tighter. Thank you. That's awesome. All right, and then the last type of handcuffing is all of the same things, but it's generally done from a prone position. This would be taking somebody into custody who we know is maybe a violent felon, has indicators of weapons, has been armed in the past, or is believed to be armed presently. Sometimes people in stolen vehicles, if certain circumstances would lead us to that, and we would generally take that person out and we would have them lay prone on their stomach. And then we would apply the same technique, so Sankajo handcuffing from the prone position. Generally in those situations, because we believe that that person's likely armed, we're gonna have somebody with lethal cover there. And then you're gonna have hopefully 2 additional officers to do handcuffing on each side. So those are the 3 types of handcuffing we do. And then use of flexible restraint device. So, these are generally used, policy allows us to use these for the purpose of protection of officers or protection of the person that we have in custody, with regards to them being resistive and, you know, situations like hitting their head on a police car or something of that nature, where they're trying to injure themselves within the police car. So this is only applied after the handcuffs are on, and this is opened up nice and wide. It's slipped around their feet, and then it's cinched tight to where they can't separate their feet apart. Once that's done, if you can use your imaginations here, the feet are slipped in this hole, handcuffs are on the person's wrists. What I'm gonna do to secure this is I'm gonna go around the handcuffs and then I'm gonna clip it to itself, right? So this is the amount of space that somebody would have between their hands behind their back and their feet. So what this does is it prevents them from extending their legs completely and getting like a full kick on the officer, right? Generally, we want to make sure anybody that's in an FRD, we're notifying our dispatch, hey, we placed this person in FRD, we're en route to the jail, and we're trying to minimize the amount of time that they're in there. And we teach to consistently monitor the person when they're in this, they're for positional asphyxia. We don't want somebody like belly down a bunch. We want to sit them on their sides to be in a recovery position. And we want to minimize the risk that this thing can pose against them. That makes sense.
When is that removed?
It's removed as soon as it's no longer needed, right? If somebody sits up and they're like, hey, I'm gonna be cool, I'm done, like, and I can remove it, I will. I have yet to see a scenario when I have felt comfortable enough to remove a flexible restraint device prior to getting to the jail. Usually this is put on when they're very, very resistive and are likely not going to calm down in the time that you get them in the car into the jail.
And sometimes I'm wondering if people really understand how, and maybe you can do it on a scale of 1 to 10, just your average person doesn't want to bring that arm back. And without you literally ripping their shoulder out of the socket, how difficult that is.
With regards to the handcuffing itself,
Yeah,
or
just like if I got my arms underneath, how difficult it is for you to get those arms out.
Yeah, single officer absolutely is very difficult, especially when you're trying to deal with 2 arms on their 1 arm, right? 2 officer handcuffing is again what we teach all the time. Any chance you get, you want 2 officer handcuffing because now I can use both my limbs on their 1 arm. That puts the advantage in my favor. But somebody, yes, that wants to resist, bring their hands into their waistline. There are techniques that can be used to get their hands out, but it is difficult. It's not. I can grab a hold of your arm and we can wrestle over your arm and you're going to be pretty successful, like holding it close to your body, right? You have a lot of strength to like tuck your arms in and keep me from prying it out. So now I need to do something other than just, try to rip it back as hard as I can, right? I need to utilize some sort of technique, or in some cases we discussed tonight, obviously, focus blows is an option in those situations. Any questions about the technique stuff?
I have one question about the key. Is it the
Yeah.
same for every officer?
Generally, yeah, as far as like, the parts of it.
So like you could hand off the suspect to.
Oh, yeah. This is the same, handcuff key is a generic key. So, the same handcuff key that's here is the same handcuff key that New York City Police Department uses.
So I should get one just
assume.
in case. I don't forget that.
That might have been a reveal.
There's a reason we search all of our custodies for weapons and implements of escape. So,
So what about, I'm sorry,
go for it.
like you see some jurisdictions use zip ties, which are clearly far less painful. Effectiveness.
So, what's the name for them? Flex cuffs. I mind linked. We actually have flex cuffs, for some specialty units, that are doing like mobile response team, I think had them at one time. I'm not sure if they still do. There may be some stage in the jail van. Flex cuffs some of them have to be cut off. Some can have like a way of opening them. Did that answer your question or?
Well, they appear to me to be far less painful than the metal against bone,
Do they break?
but what's the success rate in terms of?
I would say they wouldn't be viable to carry on a person, right? You could carry them in a vehicle. They're big, they're bulky. I mean, they're like,
Oh, they're not like just zip ties?
no, they're, so the ones that you can carry like flat on you could be like weaved through the molly vest. But then you have to actually loop them around and put them back into each other to make that loop to put the wrists in.
Do they look like these? I'm sorry.
Yes,
Okay,
Yes,
so
that's-
they're big.
Yes, they're like, I mean, they're like this big. So
Okay.
those loops are this
Okay.
big around when they're open.
I see.
There's another version that I was talking about where it's like, if I can do this. So if imagine these as like two pieces of like a zip tie, right? And with a cross here, and they both go down in that direction. Like both the sides. One would have to be looped over this way, and then the other one is looped over this way. And then you would connect the hands through there. So if I was carrying those on my vest, like on patrol, anytime I wanted to arrest somebody, I would have to pull them out. I'd have to
Oh,
shove the end in the end, shove the other end in the other end, and then go, hey, we're gonna arrest you now. So,
But there's
Not
not a third alternative like zip ties, like you see lots
Right.
of times at demonstrations and stuff. That you see departments use zip ties.
no, generally those are like a mobile response team, like our crowd control team.
Yeah.
And they would have them like on a carabiner and they would be hanging off the sides. Yeah, those are like, I would say, I don't know, I'm not on MRT. I don't know the reason for using them. I would imagine cost is probably a big one. If you have the scenario where you're gonna be making mass arrests, and you don't have the number of handcuffs, that you would need to actually utilize handcuffs, then they resort to use of those.
why do we require officers to buy a pair of handcuffs?
I don't know.
I didn't know that.
I wish,
It puzzles me why.
yeah,
Well, officers buy a bunch of gear, don't you?
yeah, a lot of
But
them.
they would be required to do this, but, I can see why maybe they would upgrade tactical gear or
Yeah.
something like that. But the requirement is 2 and the department issues 1.
So,
I'm not saying it's a hardship, but it's also not,
yeah, our handcuffing policy doesn't require 2 per se. But it is common practice and it's what we tell them, you need to carry 2 sets of handcuffs because
yeah,
I have tight shoulders, right? There are people that are a lot bigger than me that have a lot tighter shoulders than me. I need to be understanding and I need to be able to put a couple sets of handcuffs and it can't be me relying on my buddy in his pair of handcuffs.
yeah,
I need to have the ability to put my 2 sets of handcuffs. on.
yeah.
So, policy wise, it's not a policy violation if they don't, but it's necessary.
Okay, yeah. Good, thanks. Yeah, well, that was actually my question is like, what about people with different kinds of body types and ranges of motion and flexibility and mobility? But that helps.
Yeah, and I'm not aware of an officer that doesn't have 2 sets of handcuffs on.
Okay, thanks.
So hats off to, to what they're doing, so. Anything else?
Well, I don't know, it's pretty obvious, I guess, maybe that you do your best to make sure that one doesn't get on and the arm gets loose with a loose handcuff. And how do you train that?
Yeah, I mean, it can be, they can become a weapon, these handcuffs are hard and I mean. Somebody holds a handcuff like this, it can be a dangerous thing to deal with, right? Especially because the side that's gonna be off the wrist is gonna be the one side that's unlocked, for sure. So. Generally, that would be the reason that I would employ these most of the time, because when I apply this handcuff to somebody's wrist. Now I have a solid grip on something that's difficult for them to pull away from me. I can basically like grip this really hard and I can control somebody's wrist a lot easier than a set of like chain handcuffs where the other side is flipping around and I'm holding on to like a little 2-inch section of chain, right? So great question. That's exactly why I use these most of the time.
All right. Sergeant, thank you.
All right. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Do we have public?
We
Thanks, Sarge.
are about
I don't know
to
if I ever met you, but.
get to that. Do
I've seen you
we?
before.
Let's see.
Remember.
Do we have any community members who would like to present public comments?
I'm not sure who Aaron is, so if you'd like to speak, raise your hand and I'll open it up for you. If you don't, do nothing. I'll give you a couple seconds.
Yeah,
All right, no hand raised.
Okay.
I think we're still good.
all right, so it's time for closing comments. Did you start our last round, Monique? All right, no, we won't ask you to start closing comments out this time. We can start with Clay. And usually during the closing comments, we sometimes offer some comments to wrap up our discussion. Sometimes do, you know, some warm fuzzies. In the case that like Leah was leaving or that we have new members. Just kidding. So yeah, Clay, do you have any, would you like to start us out with this?
Sure, happy to.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
So welcome. I hope the first meeting was fine. I think I really appreciated Brittany's comments because about this being a part of a system, because I think my takeaway from this case and sort of the discussion is that we want to employ officers with all the tools that are helpful in these situations. And I think one tool that has been missing for a long time is appropriate systematic response to people who are experiencing crisis. And until we sort of resolve that, these cases are still going to happen, and officers will be the primary response to people with mental health issues and addiction issues that are harassing neighbors and who are who have challenging experiences in the community. So I just want to recognize that that is the context in which we're having this discussion, and it's a challenge for officers to respond to, and we should be looking at all of those cases and saying, okay, what's appropriate, what's not, and how do we evolve as a police department and as a community to respond more holistically. So that's it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Oh, I'm echoing. Oh, it stopped. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge I made my vote, but I don't even know if I still agree with it and was very conflicted. And so just holding the weight of that, and appreciating the space to agree and disagree in this group. And appreciated your reiterating of that point, Clay. And thank you for hearing that. And I don't know I've not been in this group long enough to understand what's like helpful and appropriate, but I'm on the team that supports the mobile crisis team for Lane County. So I'm happy to help bring education and resource around what some of these police alternatives are. Obviously, we've had Cahoots for forever, and as was mentioned, there's been some shifts on the scene as far as who responds to what, and it's still pretty messy right now. I can provide a little bit of context to that in the future as needed. And so just and want us to be able to hold the reality of some solutions that are coming to help fix those gaps in the system, and there's more in the work. So just throwing that out there, however it's helpful. But appreciate the time tonight. And again, welcome to Noah, and thank you that I'm now not the newest one. So I appreciate you being here.
All right, I'll start off by saying that Leah says hi and that she misses everybody and that she loves her new job. Yes, I'll get past
No, she
that on.
doesn't.
She does. Here we go. But she misses you too. Both things can be true. I don't know if anybody will watch this who I'm speaking to, but I'm very much hopeful that City Council is being responsible and courageous in their search for a new auditor, and that they're not going to just take some easy steps. And I hope that they've found a recruiter and they're reaching a large net, and that they're taking the search seriously, because it is an important job, and I hope that it's robust. That's what I hope, as I am taking myself out of it. And also thanks to Rob and Lindsay and Beatrice and everyone here for sticking it out with all of the changes. And welcome to Amanda, because I don't think I've met Amanda yet.
Thank you for the kind words. A lot of snow in Colorado.
There, yeah.
Yeah, I want to say, first give a shout out to Rob, Lindsay, Beatrice, Amanda, Mark, the folks who do a lot of work behind the scenes to tee us up to be having these conversations. And thank you, Carolyn. I've learned a lot from you. Really appreciate your comments and your presence here. I appreciate knowing that we have community members who, like you, who are welcoming of many different kinds of perspectives. Thank you. Welcome to Noah. Hope we didn't scare you off in our first meeting.
I hope I didn't scare you off.
For me?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're why I'm leaving. I'm just kidding, for the record.
It feels like the Allen are still here.
Don't put that in the minutes.
Also, yeah, shout out to Leah. I think Leah did a great job helping us navigate the kind of community aspect of this through the pandemic and over Zoom, which was, the more I think about it and the farther I'm away I am from it now, hard and difficult. And just I kind of think about this space as a kind of sacred, in a secular way, civic space for us to do some things and have conversations in ways that don't necessarily work out everywhere. I think that disagreement is like again, sacred kind of civic value, and we don't get to disagree with people over difficult things in ways that are this like well-oiled. So thanks for being a part of it. Mike?
I also want to welcome Noah again. I feel like I've said for the past few meetings that I am grateful for Rob, Lindsay, Beatrice, and Amanda. I am disappointed that Leah's left. It's really good to hear that she likes her job. I think I would like that job as well.
You know someone who does it, so that helps.
That's exciting. It's been a delight to have you participate in our meetings. I think while we've lost some knowledge, we've also gained some. And I also like the freedom that you have perhaps of not being the actual auditor, so you can say whatever you want. And that has been, I think, really great. I also agree, like, this is a great space to disagree with everybody. Yeah, I don't know. I'm disappointed that Carolyn's leaving. I think you really have been critical, especially when you served as chair for the 2 years that you did. That was
It was
really
more than 2 years, just 2 years of your time.
okay. So, yeah, you've done a lot of great work for this committee, or this board. So I think makes sense if you would like to go. It's just disappointing.
Well, I would also like to welcome myself. No, but thank you. Oh, I don't think I've met either of
I'm
you.
sorry, Cindy Coleman, Professional Standards Manager,
No.
PD.
Also a delight.
What's your
Um,
last name, Noah?
so, listen.
You don't want to say.
Then we'll sit on
We'll say it
YouTube.
after the meeting.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Not exactly appropriate, so can't help with that. But thank you for welcoming me, Rob and Mike and everyone and all that. Y'all weren't scary at all. I was afraid that I was going to be too into the weeds with it, so. Glad I met you, Carolyn, if we disappear.
I'm not gonna disappear.
Yeah, come back.
Immediately.
Public comment.
You left and came back once, right?
No, I haven't.
No.
That was
Oh,
Bernadette
That was Vernon.
and Lindsay.
Who I saw at the whole center the other day for
Was she taking a picture?
Working there.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
So I did it. I already did it.
Okay.
Yeah. But I also am very sad that Carolyn will be leaving, but we'll say more things about that next time.
Adjourned.
Bye, Brittany.
Bye, Brittany.
Brittany.